This is an oral history interview conducted for the Witness to War Serving a Nation project at Nauset Regional High School on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of this interview, please state your full name and community in which you now reside.
My name is Cecil Newcomb and I live in Orleans, Massachusetts.
Can you explain what your life was like growing up?
Well, it was a typical Cape Cod life. I was the oldest of 9 kids. It was kind of a hard scrabble life. You know, everybody here living hand to mouth in the old days. A lot of eating of fish and shellfish, because always out working around the shore. And I guess in the old days it was considered poor people's food, but today it's not, for sure. And Orleans at the time was the Kid Central for the what's called the Outer Cape. It was called the Lower Cape back in those days. And now it's one of the oldest towns in Massachusetts, as you kids probably know.
Yeah. Were any of your family members in the war?
The Vietnam War, you mean?
Or any war?
My dad was a World War II veteran.
Okay.
He was in the Army.
What was your motivation to enlist, or were you drafted?
I was initially drafted because I hadn't planned on going to college right away anyway. And because I was drafted, I wanted to go into aviation. And the only option for aviation at the time was the Marine Corps, because the draft wanted me immediately, and Air Force, Navy, and Coast Guard, there was like a year, 1 year wait to get in. But the Marine Corps offered me aviation immediately if I passed the test, and I enlisted for 4 years. So I did.
Okay. How did you feel when you found out you were drafted?
Well, everybody knew it was coming. I mean, it was the time, you know, the period in our history. Conscription was, if you didn't go to college, you knew you were going to be drafted if you were a physically able person.
Mm-hmm.
How did your family react to you being drafted?
They expected it, and you know, being one of the oldest of 9 kids, when I was 18, I was out the door one way or the other, whether I was drafted or whether I had to move on, because you know it was just one less mouth to feed, and it was time to make my own way in life.
Did any of your siblings go into the war?
No, I was the only one that went to Vietnam. My brother Clint joined the Marine Corps. He was quite a bit younger, so he joined the Marine Corps after the war was over, and he stayed in for, I think, 16 years.
Oh, wow. How did you feel about the war? What was your opinion of it?
Well, initially, we thought it was the right thing to do. It was, you know, fighting communism and the domino effect, and that's kind of how it was presented to us, and we had to stop it at the time. But from the time I went into the Marine Corps to the time I actually went to Vietnam, the whole complexion of the war had changed, and it was pretty obvious we weren't fighting to win, so it became more of a fight to survive, individually, not as a whole. But
what training did you receive before the war? What was it like?
well, boot camp was in Parris Island, South Carolina, and that was 8 weeks. It was abbreviated from 12 because they needed bodies to get to Vietnam. So I did 8 weeks in Parris Island, then I did 3 weeks at Infantry Training Regiment in what they call Camp Geiger, which is part of Camp Geiger in North Carolina. And from there I went to Memphis, Tennessee to the Naval Air Technical Training Center for my beginnings of aviation training. And I was there for about a year and a half. And then I was transferred to an active helicopter squadron in California, HMMT 302 it was called, which was another training squadron. And I was there for, well, until December of 1968. But I had orders previously in June of 1968, but my mom died on Mother's Day in 68, so they deferred my orders until January of 69, and that's when I went. So.
When you first arrived, where did you go exactly?
I was stationed in Quang Tri province, in the city of Quang Tri in northern I Corps.
Okay. Can you explain how you felt during your first days there?
Yes, I was scared to death because I had no idea what to expect. You know, the Tet offensive had happened the year before, and that was a pretty devastating blow to the Americans and the South Vietnamese too. And we were coming into the next Tet in 1969, and everybody was apprehensive that we were going to have another major attack by the North Vietnamese, which actually didn't really happen. So, but as a new guy, we were called FNGs, and I'm not going to tell you what that stands for, but people that listen will know that are veterans. And it was an eye-opening experience. You know, nobody, no matter how much training you have, nobody is really prepared for war until you're in it. So.
Mm-hmm. How old were you when you went to the war?
I was 20.
Okay.
Could you please explain to us like your average day on the base, like what you did?
Well, I was a helicopter crew chief, and what that meant was I was assigned a helicopter, and this is the model of the helicopter that I flew in. This is called a CH-46. It's made by Boeing Vertol. It's a tandem rotor, twin engine. It held 12 troops, pilot, co-pilot, crew chief, myself, and 2 gunners. And there was a gun on each side. They were 50 calibers, which is a pretty devastating weapon. Okay. So my day would start before sunrise, and I would have to go out and pre-flight the helicopter. And what that meant was have to open up all the cowlings, forward and aft, and just check all the fluid levels, just make sure the helicopter was in flyable condition. And then after I did the check, then the pilots that flew, they would come out and they would do a follow-up check to make sure I didn't miss anything. Then I'd close the helicopter up and we would get ready for our first mission of the day. And we alternated every other day. One day you do medevac, and the next day you would do like resupply or troop movements, you know, moving troops to different areas in the combat zone. And the day would last usually until dark. And then if the helicopter had issues, would be what they call a down status, I was obligated to make the repairs before I could hit the sack, and then get up the next morning and start all over again. And that's how it was day in and day out. Yeah.
How many people did you were in the helicopter with you every day? Like how many people were in here?
There were a crew of 5 every day, and the days we did medevac, there was also a corpsman with us, so there'd be a crew of 6.
What is medevac?
Medevac is medical evacuation.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah. Anytime somebody got into a situation and they needed evacuation, either us or a Huey squadron would, whoever was closest usually went in to get them. Yeah.
Okay. What was the food like on the base? Was it was it a lot different?
Hot meals were hard to find.
Yeah.
Because we were flying all the time, we ate a lot of sea rations, which were, prepackaged meals, like ham and lima beans and boned chicken, stuff that was packaged during the Korean War, but we got to eat it during the Vietnam War. And if you were lucky enough to get to the chow hall, you could get a hot meal, but we ate a lot of Spam, things. Yeah. And on the holidays, they would do their best to make sure you got a piece of turkey or some ice cream or something, you know. But it wasn't the worst, but it certainly wasn't the best.
What were the living conditions like on the base? Like, where did you sleep and everything?
Well, being in aviation, we had it probably much better than the grunts did. We lived in a hooch, that's what it was called. It was just a plywood square that had the first 4 feet of the plywood, and then the second section would be just screened. And then it had a tin roof, and they had 2, 4, 8 people slept in it, just with you know, barricades between the 4 bunks. It was bunk beds. So.
Did you have any like personal possessions that you brought there that reminded you of home or anything?
Well, pictures, you know, pictures of the family is pretty much it. You know, you didn't have a lot of room in your sea bag to bring stuff like that. And then things got sent to me once in a while through the family. And that stuff took sometimes months to get there from the time it was sent.
What did you do when you weren't like on duty flying in the helicopter in your free time? What did you do? Or did you not have any?
We didn't have much free time. But every so often the squadron would have a squadron party just to boost morale, and we'd all get kind of drunk. And, and we did have an enlisted man's club. So the nights that you got off work, you could go there and you were allowed to have 2 beers. That was the limit. And every so often they would send a USO show in, which would usually be Asian groups that played American music, and a lot of them were actually pretty good. So. But I don't think I saw more than 3 of those in the time I was there.
What was your most memorable moment in the war that you remember like the most?
You mean like the first time I was shot down?
Yeah, like that.
Okay, on the 5th of June, we went out on a night medevac, and we were relieving our sister squadron, 161. My squadron is HMM 262, and our sister squadron right beside us was HMM 161. And HMM stands for Helicopter Marine Medium, because this is a medium-sized helicopter. And then they have heavies, which were the CH-53, and the Huey, which was the smallest of the helicopters. HMM 161 had gone into the same zone that we were about to go into, and they took heavy fire, and a lot of people got wounded in the helicopter, the pilot, the co-pilot, and one of the 2 gunners. And I remember we flew into Charlie Med, and we had to pick up a jungle penetrator, and it's a large capsule that's weighted that you drop on a hoist, and it goes down through the canopy of the jungle. So, and then it opens up like an umbrella, and it has 3 seats. They're just things you grab onto and sit on. It's not much of a seat. And then we hoist them up. And I remember the crew chief, he was in the helicopter, and he was in tears, and he said to me, "You don't want to go because you won't make it out of there." And so I had that on my mind as we're flying off to the zone. And we got to the zone, we set up to do a hoist, and when I'm doing a hoist, I would lie on my belly in the middle of the helicopter, and there's a hatch there, it's called the hell hole, and you drop the hoist down through the hell hole, and as we're hovering, and we were on the edge of a river, with a sheer cliff on the opposite side of the river, and a big sandbar that came out, and it was just getting dusk. We could still see without, too much trouble, but nobody liked the nighttime in Vietnam. So I managed to get 2 people up, and we started taking heavy fire. So the pilot took off, and we orbited around for a couple minutes. And when the firing slowed down. We came in and we made another hover, and I got 2 more people in. And we were about to leave, and they asked us if we could get there was a double amputee that needed to get out immediately. And so we set up again, hoisted him in, and just after we got him in the helicopter, we saw Charlie run out on the sandbar with a 51 caliber machine gun, and he just riddled from the stem to stern in the helicopter. He killed my port gunner, and the helicopter burst into flames, and we I remember I had we were headed, we lost control of the helicopter. I thought we were going to crash into the cliff on the opposite side, and what happened was the helicopter just rolled over on its side and went into the river, which put the fire out. And so I was able to get out of the helicopter and open the 2 doors for the pilots, and we got everybody out, including the double amputee and the Neil Robinson, and we swam to shore. And then for the next 16 hours, we were in probably one of the worst firefights that took place up in that area in that year. We were pinned down for 16 hours, and when it was all over, 29 Marines were killed and 56 were wounded. And I don't know how many North Vietnamese were killed, but there were bodies everywhere. It was, it's a night that never leaves me. So. And that was the first time. So, then I was shot down 2 more times, and then I made a major miscalculation in the zone once, which caused the helicopter to, this section is called Station 410, where the engines are, and that departed the helicopter. We were doing another medevac, and my job was to direct the pilots. They could only see forward. This helicopter's 39 feet long, plus the width of the rotor blades, so you needed about 80, 85 feet of clearance. So my job was to direct them into an area where they could set down without damaging the helicopter. And I miscalculated, or a gust of wind, it was hard to say, but we were on the edge of a mountain, on the edge of a bomb crater, and the aft rotor blade hit the base of a tree at the back of the bomb crater, and it started the helicopter bouncing around, and then this section broke off. We slid down the mountain. This section fell into the bomb crater, and pieces of the rotor blades were flying everywhere. Unfortunately, no one got hurt. But it was a scary moment, I have to say. Yeah. And then the other 2 times I was shot down were very similar to the first one, except we were able to get out right away. Every time I was shot down, I was doing a hoist, because you're just hovering there. You're just a sitting duck in the air.
Very vulnerable.
Very vulnerable.
Yeah.
And the pilots had armored seats, but the crew chief didn't. Always running back and forth in fuselage, you don't have time to be worrying about that kind of thing. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Could you please explain your role in the war any further?
Well, that was my role. Like I said, I was assigned this helicopter, and it was my job to make sure that it was airworthy every day, and every time it flew, I flew with it. Pilots and co-pilots changed, and gunners changed all the time, but this was my helicopter, and I was responsible for it. So.
Did you get the people up from the ground? Did you go on the ground, or did you get them from in the helicopter?
Most of the time, we were able to land.
Yeah.
But when I said jungle canopy, there's several layers of canopy, and a triple canopy means that no light actually penetrates to the ground because it's so thick, and it's usually the hoist would be a 300-foot drop, which is very slow, as you're waiting for that reel to wind up. So, but most of them we would come into a zone and land and grab the people, or the people would get out, and we'd only be on the ground, no more than 10 seconds. That seemed like a long time, 10 seconds before we lift off. So I always felt, I'd have these rushes of adrenaline as we landed, and we'd get off, and then you could relax. And I always thought, how do these infantrymen do it? Stuck there.
For many hours.
Days, weeks sometimes, yes. Yeah.
So you said you stayed in
Quang-Tri. Yes.
How often did you move? Did you ever move around?
We moved once. We moved to Fubai in middle of September, I think, in '69, and the whole squadron moved. It was kind of the beginning of the downturn of the war. We were starting to de-escalate, and so a couple squadrons were actually deactivated and sent home, and we went down to Fubai to fill in one of those squadrons.
Were you ever injured in the war?
Yeah. That first time I was shot down, I was hit with some shrapnel in my hand and arm. I got a Purple Heart for that.
What's a Purple Heart?
Anybody that's wounded in actual combat, it's awarded the Purple Heart, and I brought the medals, some of them with me. I'll explain them.
Okay.
And this is the Purple Heart. It's a likeness of George Washington. And it's, I know people will say, well, congratulations on your Purple Heart, but I don't feel like I need congratulations because it meant that I got hurt.
Yeah.
And this one is the Bronze Star. I received that for the same night because I was able, I guess they figured I deserved it because I got everybody out of the helicopter. I don't feel that it's worthy of a medal. I was just doing what I'm supposed to do. So. But there it is. So. And this one is the Air Medal. And the Air Medal is awarded to flyers who, how do I explain this? They have different, ways of coming up with missions when you're flying. Every time you land or take off, it's called a sortie. And so after you've done I think it's 10 sorties, but I could be wrong, it could have been 20 sorties, becomes one mission. And after you get 20 missions, then you are awarded an Air Medal. So I've got 30, so I had 600 missions.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, but my friend Fred McCorkle, he flew 1,500 missions as a pilot, and he never lost a man. He was a lieutenant when we were there, and he became a 3-star general.
Wow.
Were there many casualties in your unit?
Yes. I don't remember the number, but we had like one mid-air collision where the whole crew was lost. My closest friend, Jimmy Rogers, was killed on my birthday, actually. He was another crew chief. Not, I don't remember the number for sure, but we had more injuries than we did fatalities, because we're vulnerable. We're a big, slow-moving target, and Charlie wanted to shoot down the helicopters because they were the bane of their existence.
Yeah. So did you see or experience any combat in the war, or?
Well, that's what I explained, that the first time that we were shot down, I felt like a fish out of water in combat, but after we were shot down and we made it up to the CP, which is called, CP is a command post, I was handed a rifle because as a Marine, no matter what you do in the Marine Corps, your basic MOS is you're a rifleman. And so we took up arms and shot back at Charlie. It was the only time that I really had any combat experience because, as I said before, we're in and out, in and out. We'd shoot our guns once in a while, but it was over in seconds, and then we were gone.
Can you tell us of the friendships that you had in the war, and are you still in touch with anyone?
Actually, we have reunions, and that's what this hat is.
Oh.
HMM 262, this is one of our reunion hats, and we get together there's two associations. There's the Marine Corps Combat Helicopter Pilot and Crewmen's Association, which is all the helicopter squadrons that get together every other year. And then we have our own HMM 262 reunion on the off years. And I don't go every year. It's kind of a major expense to go, and so I go every few years. And I still have friends that I stay in contact with. My good friend Bill Edwards, we were in California together before he went to Vietnam ahead of me. He was in at 161, which was the squadron beside us, and me being in 262, so we stayed together, and we've been in touch and visited each other. He was in Florida. My friend Jimmy Boersma out in Michigan. Yeah, we still stay in touch. It's kind of like a fraternity in many ways.
Yeah.
Can you tell us any specific war memories that you might have?
Any other ones that you?
You know, after a while, all the days ran together, and it's hard to actually pick out specifics other than the ones that I've told you about. I can tell you of another hoist job that took place in August of '69, and we were asked, we weren't doing medevac that day, but we heard a call that they needed a medevac, and we were the closest helicopter to them, so we went in to pick the guy up, and it was another hoist job. We're inside the demilitarized zone, which looked like a barren moonscape. You know, it was completely bombed out, and there were just trees that had no leaves on them because everything had been defoliated, and it was really kind of a creepy place. And, I dropped the hoist, was dropping the hoist down, and we'd asked if they'd had any contact, and they said we hadn't had contact in weeks. And as I'm dropping the hoist down, I heard, you know, pip, 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 and I said, "Sir, somebody's firing," and he hollered down, you know, on the radio, you know, "Are you people firing?" And they said no, and the next thing you know, they riddled again the helicopter, and they wounded my starboard gunner. This time he was shot in the leg. And then we lost boost power, so we were going in, and I was able to dive into the cockpit and hit the isolation switch, which kept hydraulic fluid from completely emptying out of the helicopter, and they were able to get it on the ground. And then when you flew in pairs, so the chase bird was able to come down and get us out of there. And when the next day when they went to get the helicopter, they sent a salvage team in to pick it up. Charlie had shot over 600 holes in it. They just completely destroyed the helicopter. So,
How many years were you in Vietnam?
I was only there 10 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
During that time, how did you stay in touch with your family?
Just by letter, and it was a very slow process. You could write a letter, and it might take 2 or 3 weeks to get home, and then by the time they answered that letter, it could be 5 or 6 weeks. Then once in a while, one would get there in a week. You never knew with just the process. And then when I went to Australia for R&R, I called home. And in those days, you had to call and reserve a time. So I called the day ahead to reserve space and let the family know, the operator would let the family know that they'd be receiving a call at whatever time it was. And turned out my dad wasn't able to get home in time for the call. So I never got to talk to him. And there's more to that story later.
Okay. So when did you find out that you were leaving Vietnam?
Well, to go right to that story
Okay.
now. One day I got a call from the chaplain, and he said, my friend Lieutenant Boyack, who was the co-pilot the first time I was shot down, and we still stay in touch. He lives in Grand Junction, Colorado, and we go out to visit him. He comes to visit me every year, about every other year, I guess. He came in and said, the chaplain wants to see you. And when you know the chaplain wants to see you, there's only one reason. Somebody had died. And it turned out that my dad was killed in a construction accident in Hyannis. So I left Vietnam on the 1st of November of '69. And being the oldest of 9 children, I was coming home to what I thought was worse than being in a war zone. Trying to raise 9 or 8 brothers and sisters when I was barely able to keep myself together at that time. My nerves were pretty shot by the time this had all happened.
Could you describe your life after the war, like you raising your siblings?
Well, my grandmother at the time, she was 80. She moved in, and she was a wonderful lady. She really kept the family together because I was having a really, really bad time of it. I took up alcohol. I was drunk a lot. I couldn't keep a job. I think when I finally made it to the VA hospital for treatment, I had had 43 jobs in 12 years or something like that. It was a tough go for me, for a lot of veterans. And it started right at Logan Airport when I got home. When I left from Da Nang, I was put on a Air Force 141 jet to come home, and there was a colonel, a captain, and myself. I was a corporal at the time, and there were 14 caskets that were in the belly of the plane, and we flew to Dover, Delaware, and then I got a commercial flight from Delaware to Boston. And while I was in Boston waiting for someone to pick me up, I was yelled at, spit on, and because being in Vietnam at that time was just not very favorable in this country.
How did serving in the war influence you and your opinion of war?
Well, I was very conflicted. they were going to have the March on Washington to protest the war, and I really felt that I should go, but I had friends that were still in Vietnam, and I felt that would be disrespectful to them.
Mm-hmm.
So I usually kept my opinions to myself, like all of us. I mean, nobody talked about it. We wouldn't admit we were veterans out in public. It was a turbulent time in this history.
Yeah. Have you ever gone back to Vietnam since?
Yes, I went back in 1995. I have a friend who worked, he was a State Department advisor, and he's now a doctor living in Hope Valley, Rhode Island. And his name is Steve Cummings, and his friend Lionel Rosenblatt and I went back, and we started in Saigon, which is now Ho Chi Minh City, and we traveled. Our goal was to make it from Saigon to Hanoi, but we didn't make it all the way. I mean, there was just too many things to see, and they had a lot of friends that they were reuniting with, and Steve, his job, or his mission in life was he wanted to open hospitals in Vietnam for the people that were still there suffering from landmines, amputees, and he's, to this day, he still goes back a couple times a year, and he's brought students over to become doctors, be American-trained doctors, to go back and keep these hospitals going. So I was with them, and it was good because they spoke the language, which I didn't. I knew Didi Mao, which meant get out, This is something you yelled all the time to get the Arvins out of the helicopter because they didn't want to leave. And Lionel ran a group called Refugees International, and he would go around the hot spots in the world and just to make sure that the civilians were safe and do whatever he could to protect the civilians. And it was my first time actually being on the ground, other than when I was shot down.
Yeah.
So traveling the city, meeting the people, they were the nicest people. They loved Americans, and this is 20 years after the war. Over 50% of the population wasn't even born yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a great experience for me. The food was great. Much better than I had when I was there. And I hope to go back again someday. I'd like to take Ann over and show her the country, because it is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. And we have one more question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Would you do it all over again? Why or why not?
That's a tough question. I would say to any veteran, I would be very honored to be with the people I was with again,
Mm-hmm.
as Marines or soldiers or Navy men or airmen or Coast Guardsmen, whatever the service. But I don't think that we should be fighting any wars that aren't in direct protection of this country, not this country's interests, but this country. Too many battles are being fought today for oil interests and big money interests, not for the protection of this country and its citizens. Yeah.
Well,
Thank you
so much.
Well, thank you. It was interesting.